Live stream it on. I think we'll be done well before.
Todd?
Well, hopefully the fire district's here because
Chief Kirk's over there. Yeah.
Hey, Chief.
Oh, there he is.
Hey, Chief Kirk. Okay, is it 7?
There we go.
It is
Are they even?
It is 6 o'clock.
Are they even?
Yes.
Look, are they even, Steve?
You know you're on live stream like that.
I know.
That's
It's Todd's fault. He brought it
that's
for me.
just so wrong.
I must ask you a question, Todd. I was like,
It's 6 o'clock, and we're going to start our city council work session on TIF and CID incentives, and he's just so weird with those on, Rich. Okay, and I'm going to ask Bruce Kimmel and Tyler Ellsworth from Ellers and Kutak Rock, respectively, to present an informational session on TIF and CID. Good evening, gentlemen.
All right. Good evening, Mayor and Council. And I can't remember whose idea it was, so I don't know where to give credit. But in any event, thanks for having us this evening. We thought that with the request before the council this evening and really through the next several weeks to consider TIF and CID incentives for the Moonlight Plaza Shopping Center, that this would be a good opportunity just to give sort of a refresher on what exactly TIF and CID incentives are and kind of how they operate mechanically. So what we'll do is Bruce and I are going to kind of tag team this evening, and the idea is that we present for maybe 20 or 30 minutes and then answer any questions that you all have after that. But certainly if there's something along the way that catches your eye or that we need to drill down on, please interrupt and we'll address it. So I'll talk a little bit about the mechanics, about the processes. Bruce will get into a little bit later sort of the financial considerations and some of the bigger policy questions. And then we'll talk very briefly at the end about how the requests for incentives relate to the Moonlight Plaza project in particular, and then we'll go from there. So without further ado, we'll jump right into TIF, I think. Don't know if this is on though. Should be. Got it. Thank you.
Okay.
So I'm actually going to skip to the second slide and talk about how TIF works. So TIF, in theory, is a redirection of new taxes that are generated. It's not a tax abatement. The idea is that all the taxing jurisdictions are sort of held harmless from the time that a TIF is put in place, and any incremental tax revenue that is generated from new development can be used, all or a portion of it can be used to reimburse the developer for their improvement costs. And so what you see on the left here, this is an illustration of your property and your property tax collections without a TIF in place. You've got the base property taxes, that's all that's being produced because there are no new improvements on the property. On the right side, it's an illustration of the property tax collections with TIF. And so you have your base property taxes being collected and being distributed to all the taxing jurisdictions just as they were before the TIF was put in place. And then you have all that property tax increment above, the darker blue, the lighter green, that's all incremental property taxes. And portions of that get stripped off. 21.5 mils by statute get stripped out, and they're not available to use for reimbursing redevelopment costs. But the balance of that, the darkest or the sort of medium blue at the top of that stack there is the property tax increment that's left over that can be used to pay costs for putting in streets, putting in sewers, etc. Whatever you decide to use it for, consistent with the statute. Over on the right side, I have sort of a dashed boxes around sales tax and a box around something that says TGT. And TGT doesn't apply to this particular project. Sales tax may or may not. But under the TIF statutes, you can actually use not only the property tax increment, but also incremental sales tax and incremental transient guest tax if you choose to reimburse project costs. The way a TIF incentive is put in place, there's several steps, but it really breaks down into 2 phases. The first phase is creation of the TIF district itself, and the second phase is consideration and approval of the TIF project plan, and there can be multiple projects, multiple project plans inside any particular TIF district. Tonight, you're being requested to consider creation of a TIF district that encompasses the Moonlight Plaza Shopping Center. And what that involves is making a finding that the area bounded by the district, so the shopping center and some parcels at each end, are blighted, and there are 9 statutory factors that you can base your determination on. And we'll get into that in more detail during the public hearing, but suffice it to say there are 9 factors. If you, as a governing body, decide that at least 5 of those factors are present, or if somebody says there are 7 and somebody else says, well, I think there are only 6, I mean, you can agree that there are a majority of the 9 in one form or another present within the district, then you can find that the district is blighted and pass an ordinance establishing the TIF district. And that sets the base value for tax purposes. So to go back to the next slide, that sets the value for now through sort of the end of when the TIF district is in place. And you'll always, the county, the school district, the other taxing jurisdictions will always collect taxes based on that base value that would be set. After the TIF district is in place, then we move sort of to a slightly more granular level and look at the TIF project plan. We have more detailed numbers at that point about exactly what's going to be proposed in the TIF district, and exactly how those revenues are shared between the city and the developer. There's a finding by the Planning Commission for each project plan that the plan complies or is consistent with the city's comprehensive plan, and then the project goes before you as the governing body again for approval.
I think one other thing to note here is that if you just set up a TIF district, nothing really happens. In Kansas law, it's essential to have at least one project area to actually utilize the incremental dollars and to put them towards eligible project costs. So tonight is just sort of setting the table, if you will, and you'll take future steps culminating in what's scheduled for December to get to an actual plan to utilize the TIF mechanism itself.
So I think that's probably enough about TIF for the moment. Shifting gears and talking about community improvement districts. Community improvement districts are similar to TIF in that you define an area, and from that area you generate revenue, and you can actually look at 2 different sources of revenue for community improvement districts. You can have community improvement district based on an add-on sales tax up to 2% collected from retail sales in the district. You can have special assessments levied to pay back costs of the improvements over time, or you can do some combination of both. A CID is initiated by petition from landowners. That's a different from TIF, but it's kind of a distinction without a difference, because at this point anymore, a developer would ask for a CID just as a developer would ask for a TIF incentive. So that's not much of a difference, even though the statute is a little bit, doesn't match between the 2 different types of incentives. One of the big differences between TIF and CID is that CID costs can really be almost anything you or a developer wants them to be. You can pay for vertical construction out of CID, you can pay for public improvements, land acquisition, you can pay interest, you can even pay operating costs, things like marketing, security for the premises, things like that. TIF is more restricted, and TIF typically is limited to land cost and infrastructure. There's some private improvements that you can finance with TIF, but you typically can't do vertical construction like you can for CID. And both CID and TIF you can use bonds to finance the project, or you can proceed on a pay-as-you-go basis, and Bruce will get into that in a little bit.
So one thing to note that we often do when we're looking at a development budget is we look at all of the developer's expected costs for the entire project. And then we typically have a TIF eligible column and a CID eligible column. And not to say that you're going to pay all those costs, but it's helpful to see where they overlap, because sometimes they will, right? Especially since CID is so permissive. Almost everything in a developer's column will be, or on a developer's budget will be in the CID column, much less will be in the TIF. But it's a helpful way to sort of gauge, as you think about, okay, here are the revenues that could be collected, how can we actually use them? You have to marry them up to the respective column.
So here's a side-by-side comparison of TIF and CID, recovering some of the ground that I've already discussed, talking about the eligibility for TIF requiring, at least at the district level, that you find that the area is eligible. CID, on the other hand, is initiated by petition, the property owner's request that the district be put in place. TIF reimbursement goes primarily for land and infrastructure. CID can be used for both of those, plus vertical construction. And then in terms of timing, each TIF project within a TIF project area, which is typically like a subset of the TIF district itself, reimbursed project costs. Costs can be reimbursed for up to 20 years from the approval of that project plan. CID is a little bit different, and CID reimbursement can run for 22 years if it's a sales tax, or 20 years if it's special assessments.
Tyler, on the petition process, remind me, you might have said this, but does it require 100% consent of the landowners?
It doesn't. I think it's 55%.
Okay.
So in theory, you could have a district that includes people that aren't petitioners, and then you would have to determine.
That's right. You would have to decide if that was fair and appropriate. And it's important that the tenants don't have that vote. It's the property owners.
That's right.
And some tenants have clauses that will actually say they need to consent to, owner requested tax changes, but most don't, I think.
I think so that's fair.
It's usually a landowner decision.
Yeah. So I think that's it for my portion. If you want to chat about, for right now, to chat about how these different things work in terms of the finances.
Great, thanks. So, as Tyler mentioned, the tools that can be used for actually doing something with the TIF and the CID are substantially similar, with a few differences. The tool that is used most often and is the typical default option in a good way, not in a bad default way, is pay-as-you-go, where you enter into a contract, an IOU almost, with the private party saying, to the extent that CID revenues or TIF is actually generated and collected, we will then send payments to you. It might not be 100%, it could be 95%, it all gets negotiated, but typically twice a year, those funds get sent to the developer, and those could either go all towards the principal amount of the note. Let's say you set up a note with $1 million principal value, and you get $100,000 of TIF. One of the things that would need to get worked out is, does that $100,000 go just to paying down the principal balance, so down to $900,000, or is there some interest rate component there, right? The developer is putting their money in, and so there's typically a candid discussion about whether and how the city will or won't be willing to put in an interest rate component. Obviously, if there's interest, that $100,000 goes first towards paying whatever interest has accrued, and then the remainder gets paid off on the principal balance. So it takes longer to pay it off, but again, that's a common feature. We also look really carefully at what is that maximum reimbursement amount and what is the maximum term. You might set a term that is shorter than the statutory maximum of 20 years. You might say, hey, if you can pay off this note with your tax increment in 10 or 15 years, great. And maybe you'll even set a maximum limit that's fairly high, but we want you to be done in, let's say, 10 years. And so if year 10 comes and that entire note hasn't been paid off, it's just done. You don't have to make up any difference. There's no obligation on the city's part after that point. Conversely, if this project does better than expected and generates more increment and pays it off before 10 years, let's say they get to that maximum amount in 8 years, then the note stops then as well. So you can see the benefits to the city of a pay-as-you-go, but it does require the developer to come up with their own capital, right? Because they're just getting reimbursed. They have to come up with the debt or the equity to fund those project costs that will be reimbursed. So then an alternative is issuing revenue bonds, either special obligation or general obligation revenue bonds. Special obligation just means essentially that the bonds are pledging only the revenues, whether they're CID revenues or TIF revenues, and there's no city backstop behind that. So the bonds would have a set debt structure, but if, let's say in a given year, you're scheduled to pay $125,000 and you only have $100,000, then you're not expected to come out of pocket for the other $25,000. For that reason, investors that buy these bonds typically want a higher interest rate, substantially higher than they would bid on a city general obligation bond that you sell for infrastructure projects, for instance. And they want things like debt coverage ratios and debt service reserve funds and other features to try to mitigate their risk, all of which adds to the overall cost of that type of financing. So it's very powerful in that it gives the developer upfront money, but there are trade-offs there with using that tool because it is a somewhat expensive way to utilize those TIF or CID revenues. And then finally, not surprisingly, general obligation revenue bonds. Still, your plan is to use those TIF or CID revenues to pay the bonds back, but you're saying, okay, we're going to backstop that with the city's full faith and credit. And as you can imagine, that drops the interest rate quite a bit, right? Because the investors know that you are standing behind them. We don't see that happen very often. It's typically only in cases where it's a super high priority project for the city and there's really a clear need for something that's above and beyond either PAYGO or SO bonds. And which button do I hit? This side one?
That one. Yep.
Okay. All right, so with that backdrop on the mechanisms and on financing options, I just wanted to cover a few policy questions, and these aren't an exclusive list. There's certainly many more that you probably will think of, but even before you get to the question of, okay, do we provide TIF? Do we provide CID? How much? What kind of limits do we want to set on those tools? You have to ask, okay, is this a project where you feel comfortable entertaining the use of these tools? Because if you're not interested, there's really no reason for Tyler and I to go any further, or at least we have to go to Plan B and discuss with the developer other options potentially for reducing some of their costs. You also want to make sure that the developer knows what they're doing, right, and has the capacity to deliver what they're proposing, because whether it's the Moonlight Project or anywhere else, part of the reason why you're potentially getting involved is to deliver a project that you'll think adds value to the city and to the taxpayers. And so you want to be comfortable that this is a partner that's worth doing business with. Then the but-for test, and this is probably what I spend most of my time on, is really digging into the economics of the project, looking at, okay, what are some of the extraordinary costs? What are some of the market limitations? What might be other factors that lead there to be a gap in the financing? In other words, that without some level of city assistance, this developer isn't likely to do this project. It's not to say that a developer might not do any project, but what they're proposing isn't likely to occur in the near term for various reasons. Or there have been cases where I say, you know what? I'm not seeing a gap. I'm not seeing a need for incentives, and then you have an honest discussion with the developer about how you go forward from there. But it's that kind of fact-finding and analysis that gets us to a point of making some recommendations and findings to the city as to the need for assistance. Then, assuming you say yes to using these tools, yes, you think this is a worthy developer and a worthy project, yes, there's some need for assistance, then we look at, okay, what are these tools? What could they deliver in terms of assistance? And what are your options for using them? The developer, both on this project and in general, developers say, we want these forms of assistance, right? But your participation is always discretionary. And so it's up to the city to decide, okay, are we wanting to use these same tools? And if yes, do we want to use them in the same ways as what the developer has requested? Or do we want to use them in a different way? So again, going with it more of an open, a clean slate approach, looking at all the options, and then whittling down from there. So then transitioning from that kind of analysis and fact-finding to negotiations. You make a decision. You put an offer on the table responding to the developer's request. What are you going to offer as an incentive? And are you going to use TIF? Are you going to use CID? And then what funding mechanisms will you use? Are you going to say exclusively PAYGO, and in which case you want to define those maximums so that you know at what point that PAYGO agreement will be done, right? Whether you hit the maximum amount or maximum term, and the interest rate, if any, as well. Or if you're willing to entertain SO bonds as part of the mix, you also want to have some sense of what's a reasonably efficient financing. Because again, even though it's not risk to the city, these are still city taxes that are being used, and you want to have some sense that this is a reasonably efficient capitalization of those revenue streams. And then you also get to decide, are there performance standards? You are participating, you're putting forward an offer for negotiation. Do you want to make sure that the project is developed within a certain time frame, or that there's other standards of quality? And what happens if they don't meet those standards of either timing or quality as well? And those can all be legitimate parts of the negotiation process. And then there's many other factors that Tyler thinks about as well to mitigate city risk and protect your interests, which are some of the other elements in a development agreement. And I'm going to let you describe those.
Sure. And Bruce has touched on these already to some extent in the items he just discussed. What are the developer obligations? Is there a time frame in which you want the project to be completed? Are there quality standards? Do you want to reimburse only certain costs? Maybe a developer will have public infrastructure costs and private costs of their own, things like fixing up a parking lot, that maybe you'd rather have the money go toward a public improvement where the city gets, in theory, more of a benefit than a reimbursement to something that's privately owned. So those are the kinds of things that we think about. We also look at, as Bruce mentioned early on, he looks at the initial stage when the application comes in, whether he and staff think that the developer can perform and complete the project as they promised. But then when we're putting the development agreement together, we also think about what happens if this developer puts this project together and then wants to sell the project either after it's completed or partway through. How does that work? What sort of requirements do we want to have on anybody that would be a transferee of the developer's interest in this land or in this agreement so that we know that they can perform? Just as we're expecting the developer to perform initially. The other fun parts of the development agreement are the details of how reimbursements get made, sort of what all the documents are that we as staff expect to see from the developer or their representatives when they say, you know, I spent $10,000 resurfacing this parking lot, or $100,000, and we want to know, well, you know, do you have an invoice? Is it paid? What part of the parking lot did you improve? Did you improve stuff that was outside the district, inside the district, etc.? So we get into all that. And those are sort of some of the finer points of the deal that we get into. And I think that kind of wraps it up. We will talk a little bit now and shift gears and talk about the project that's currently before you, that you'll be hearing about again, of course, at the regular meeting shortly. And also look at the time frame, where we are tonight, where we are sort of the big picture, thinking about putting a TIF incentive in place and putting a CID incentive in place. So to start with, have you all seen this map? I think it's been provided to you, but I just want to make sure everybody's familiar with this. So that this is a map of the proposed 3 different project areas in the Moonlight Plaza project. So the inline retail shops are right there in the middle. On my screen, it's sort of a greenish, grayish beige, and that's proposed to be project area 3 in the TIF district. Project area 2 is to the right. It's that orange area, and that includes the existing Price Chopper store, as well as a pad site, which I think is down on Main Street. Project area 1 is at the far west end of the site. It's green space now, and it will be developed into a new Price Chopper, and there's also a pad site down there, at least one pad site off of Main Street. So the idea is that the entirety of the shopping center outlined in that dark black line would be the TIF district, and you would have 3 different project areas within that TIF district with specific improvements. And currently, the CID is also proposed to be the entirety of that TIF district. So at the risk of confusing things, that bold outline would be the outline of the TIF district itself, and it would also be the boundary of the CID in which the sales tax would be added on to pay CID reimbursement.
If I can just jump in, part of the reason why we called them projects 1, 2, and 3 was also to indicate sequencing. It's the developer's plans to get going with project 1 this coming winter and spring. Project 2, of course, couldn't really happen until the new Price Chopper is up and running and ready to go. And then Project 3 is the one with the least amount of, I guess, certainty or clarity as to the timing. In addition, Tyler mentioned that these are 3 potential TIF project areas, but you might not be actually setting up TIF projects for all 3 of these in December, assuming we go along. For sure, we know Project 1 would be a TIF project area request of the City Council. But we have some more work to do, some more discussions to figure out exactly whether and how projects 2 and 3 would become TIF projects. So I just wanted to make that clarification.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And then in terms of timing, tonight we're in the phase of the TIF proceedings where we're just establishing the district. We're not looking at detailed numbers or projections or signing a development agreement as to how to share revenues. We're just saying, here's the area that we'd like to include in the district, and you'll have a presentation both from the developer and from their consultant that put together the price analysis that's been provided to walk you through why they think that you will be able to come to a conclusion that the area is blighted, and you can certainly ask them questions about what's in that study. But so tonight we have the hearing, and we have an ordinance, passage of an ordinance that establishes a district. There's actually nothing on TIF project plans this evening that will be part of the regular meeting, although if the TIF district is created, then we'll follow that actually next week with consideration at the Planning Commission of 1 or 2 TIF project plans going forward. The next 2 couple of critical dates, one is November 5th and one is December 17th. On November 5th, we would be back before you to have resolutions setting hearings on consideration of the TIF project plans, and also a resolution setting a hearing on establishing the CID. Those hearings would then occur at your December 17th meeting. And if you agree to that, if we're ready to proceed, and if we have a development agreement basically nailed down at that point, then you could look at approving those TIF projects, setting up the CID, and approving a development agreement. Potentially, if we're at that point as well, sort of the third facet of the request here from the developer is to use sales tax exemption IRB for savings on the sales tax relating to construction materials.
So one other thing to note here is this seems like a lot of time, 2 months to get from A to B, right? So I understand it, this is pretty much the fastest that we can go just because there's time parameters even for calling for these public hearings, right?
This is really quick.
Right.
Yeah.
He said that a number of times. This is
Yeah.
really quick.
Really quick.
But from our perspective, we'll also be working on a lot of different fronts, finishing the but-for and the TIF projections, the but-for analysis and the TIF projections. I need to do a feasibility report on the TIF project area or areas saying that there will be enough TIF revenues to do what the city is contemplating doing in those TIF project areas. And then there's actually just hashing out all of the nitty-gritty terms of the development agreement. So, we'll be communicating with you in various forms between now and then so that that development agreement isn't just a, here it is, surprise, but we wanted to foreshadow some of this and some of the things that we'll be hashing out with the developer over the next couple of months.
Yeah, and I guess the only other final note to end on is certainly we can answer any questions, but based on where we are in the proceedings tonight, you're not agreeing to anything. You're not committing to share any sort of tax revenues or tax increment or anything like that with the developer. At this evening is just establishing the TIF district and nothing else. So I wanted to make that point clear.
And really, it's not until December 17th that
right.
the real obligations get set, right? Even
exactly.
setting those public hearings, the city could do that and then still decide, you know what, something fell out of bed.
That's
we're
right.
stepping back.
That's right. We're stepping back. Either we are going to take comments at the public hearing and maybe continue that into January, or we're going to go back and reevaluate because something has come to light that nobody anticipated. So that's absolutely right. So.
All right. See, I told you it was better than Sunday Night Football.
Oh, man.
This is.
So thanks a lot, gentlemen. I'm going to ask for comments or questions from folks here that might want to get more information on the TIF and CID process. Mark, you got something? Todd?
Just a quick question on the CID, when you mentioned like the not the tax, but the
specials?
specials. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Is that also subject to the 55% approval by?
It is. It is. That would need to be part of the petition, and the petition in this case just called for a sales tax.
Yeah. That's all I have.
All right. Lee? Rich? Randy?
I had a couple of items. What has the developer asked for, or do we know yet?
Bruce actually can speak to that a little
Sure.
better than I can. He's had pretty detailed discussions with them.
Yeah, and there's some information that we're still clarifying, but essentially, and please correct me if I get a detail wrong, the developer has asked for you to set up this TIF district, right, first and foremost, and then has asked for up to the maximum term of both property tax reimbursement and sales tax reimbursement. So the incremental new property taxes that would be generated, and that can be actually captured, net of the ones that Tyler mentioned that state law prohibits capturing in TIF, and then incremental new sales taxes above and beyond what Moonlight Plaza and the Price Chopper are currently generating. They're looking to capture both of those or have the city rebate those revenue streams back to them on a pay-as-you-go note. So on the TIF stream, that's what they're looking for, and they've calculated a present value of several millions of dollars for that. We're still clarifying some of those details as well. And then on the CID, they've asked again for this CID district, and then the 1% supplemental new sales tax for up to 22 years, and to use that to repay one or more series of special obligation bonds. So they're looking for sort of a hybrid. They want pay-as-you-go on the TIF side, using both property and sales TIF, and then SO revenue bonds for the CID. And then, as Tyler mentioned, also that sales tax exemption that is part of that IRB process. So those are the kind of the three big elements, or four, when you think of the two types of TIF separately.
And the reason for that is because, and I'm just asking, I don't know, I'm not a construction person, but so they have a new structure, which would be Project 1. They have the existing structure, which is Project 2, and then the strip mall, Project 3. So they're wanting to build and upgrade and then bringing some new vendors or some new occupants into the existing price chopper. And through these 3 or 4 mechanisms, they would utilize that throughout all 3 projects.
More or less, with different levels. I don't want to speak for the developer and their request, and I think it'll be appropriate for them to summarize it, but there is a preponderance of the incentives that are being proposed for the new price chopper because they're looking at what that's going to cost, including with filling in the drainage swale and some of the other site improvements, also just cost of construction versus what the Cosentinos and their partners at AWG think is market reasonable in terms of the actual cost that can be supported by their operations, and they're seeing a gap there.
Right.
And so that's the biggest element. There might be some level of TIF and CID that would go towards Project 2, although that seems to be more self-supporting. And then the idea is that, at least that we've heard, is that there'd be CID assistance for Project 3.
Okay.
So you can see how there are different levels and combinations.
Absolutely. And then I'd just like to understand more about pay-as-you-go and incentives tied to completion dates so that you can accelerate that. So correct me if I'm wrong, Laura or Larry, but the Excelligence IRB bond was a little different than the Coleman IRB bond. So that was, I think, 10 versus a 5 with accelerators 6 through 10. Is that right? Yeah.
Go ahead, Larry.
So the question, I guess, is can we do something like that? I think you alluded to it, but can you do something like that if you go pay-as-you-go?
No, sir.
Okay.
The Excelligence project used only industrial revenue bonds.
Okay.
And what you're referring to is the breakdown for the tax abatement.
Abatement, okay.
That was allowed for that project where we accelerated the percentage at the first 5 years, and then it goes back on the tax rolls at 20% a year for the second 5 years.
Right. Okay.
Here, when you're using TIF, you can't abate any taxes because if you do, there's nothing to collect. So
That's fair.
they're 2 different
Mechanisms.
financial mechanisms.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had a quick question about the sales TIF. I'm sure they're going to be making their presentation, but if they were to get the property TIF but not the sales TIF, what kind of what kind of impact would that potentially have, given the fact they're already capturing the 1 cent sales tax for the CID?
You know, Mr. Mayor, I think that will be a point of active discussion with them. Their perspective at this point is that they really need
Both?
all 3 of those tools along with the sales tax exemption to get their gap filled as they see it within a reasonable time frame. I think the city might come to a somewhat different conclusion, and then you negotiate.
Sure.
And I would say that the sales TIF, and I think I've shared this with some of you, is probably the most valuable city stream, right, in terms of the flexibility and the fact that it's all coming from the city as opposed to property TIF, which is also capturing some of the incremental taxes from other jurisdictions. Of course, you wouldn't want to give any of this incentive unless you believe that there is a gap, right? If you're not convinced that this project is iffy or wouldn't go forward as it's currently proposed without incentives, then we should have a conversation about that.
And if I could
Yes.
just interject, not just this project, but any future project
Precedent.
on the same location. So that same district, which is the hottest part of town at the moment, we have to consider everything in there, regardless of what's there currently, regardless of what project is proposed. We have to look at that whole thing.
And Councilmember Moore, that's a great point. And one of the things that I often ask councils to consider is if you decide that this deal is too rich, is too much, if staff and consultants have done the best they can, have gotten to a certain point, and you think it's still too much, you ask yourself then, how long are you willing to wait for that next deal to coalesce and come together? And not in a threatening way, but in an honest, like, okay, we can wait, or no, this makes sense to go forward, even if we're not entirely happy with it. So it's a judgment call. It's always a judgment call.
And in that same vein, we're talking about opportunity costs, is not really what you're
Absolutely.
talking about. Construction costs will continue to go up. It's not like it's going to be cheaper to develop on that corner. So we also have to think about the marginal ask if we do have a project that comes 5 years from now versus this year. And your but-for analysis will be critical in this because you'll be able to break down what the gap is from your perspective and from financial advisors' perspective.
Right.
So, anything else? All right, great. Well, then we've got 20 minutes before our council meeting. Thank you very much, gentlemen. And I don't know if there'd be a possibility that we could get this presentation sent to the council members. I think it'd be really good for them to have in their back pocket, since this is not going to be the last time we talk about CID.
Absolutely.
And TIF, so.
And
Okay.
I would just note that Tyler and I will both be here for the consideration of the TIF district too. So
Great.
thank you.
Thanks, guys.
forgot about NEFAS. That place is
Are we on? It's 7 o'clock in Gardner, Kansas. I will call the Gardner City Council meeting to order. Will you please rise with me and recite with me the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we have a light schedule this evening. Actually, it's not real light, but it will be definitely eventful. I'm going to start with a proclamation, and I'm going to come out here to the front. So it's nice we have we have some very well-dressed gentlemen over here in the second to last row over here. They're the folks from Johnson County Fire District 1, and led by our inimitable Fire Chief, Rob Kirk, who's here this evening. Thank you very much, sir. This month, the month of October, is Fire Prevention Month nationally as well as within the state of Kansas, and we are going to proclaim Fire Prevention Month this week in the city of Gardner for the month of October. And I believe that Dennis... Oh, okay, great. Well, come on, guys, all of you.
Short straw, look at that.
Okay, all right, just come on up, come on up.
Oh, look,
I want you guys to be recognized for this. And you guys dressed up for this, you might as well. Okay, so I'm going to read out this proclamation. It won't take that long. Whereas the City of Gardner is committed to ensuring the safety and security of all those living in and visiting Gardner, and whereas in Kansas, 100% of civilian fire deaths in 2017 occurred in residential structure fires, and there were 2,589 residential fires in Kansas in 2017, resulting in 18 deaths and 214 injuries. And whereas Gardner residents should identify places in their home where fires can start and eliminate those hazards, and whereas Gardner residents should install smoke alarms in every sleeping room outside each separate sleeping area and on every level of the home, should listen for the sound of the smoke alarm, and when it sounds, respond by going outside immediately to the designated meeting place. And whereas we know Gardner residents who have planned and practiced a home fire escape plan are more prepared and will therefore be more likely to survive a fire. And whereas Kansas first responders and the Office of the State Fire Marshal are dedicated to reducing the occurrence of home fires and home fire injuries through prevention and protection education. And whereas the 2018 Fire Prevention Week theme, Look, Listen, Be Aware, Fire Can Happen Anywhere, effectively serves to remind us that we need to take personal steps to increase our safety from fire. Now for there be a resolve that I, Steve Shute, Mayor of the City of Gardner, Kansas, do hereby proclaim the month of October 2018 as Fire Prevention Month of the City of Gardner, and ask the citizens of this community to be aware of their surroundings, look for available ways out in the event of a fire or other emergency, respond when the smoke alarm sounds by exiting their building immediately, and to support the many public safety activities and efforts of fire and emergency services such as the fine gentlemen at Johnson County Fire District 1. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Here's your proclamation.
I just kind of want to add that we did our Fire Prevention Week last week with the area schools. We still have one scheduled for this week, but just last week only we touched 528 of the second and third graders in the school district. So it was, to me, it was heartwarming because we were asking them questions and they already knew the answer. So we touch them twice, and then it seems like they're catching on real good. And the smoke detector program, just to be aware that we do have a smoke detector program. If you know of anyone that doesn't have one, contact us. We'll be glad to come out and put them in their house. We want everyone to have working smoke detectors. All right.
The next had a fire last night and lost a life.
Yeah.
Fire last night, so if you don't have smoke detectors, please call us and we'll go.
And it's like Chief Myers always says, he's our operations chief. I'm the prevention chief. When my job fails, he has to take over, so we try to keep him we don't do much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right, next up is a recognition of the city's public works and participants in the 2018 American Public Works Association Snowplow and Equipment Expo. Mr. Kramer, Public Works, I hear that we did pretty well.
Yes, we did do pretty well. And so the event itself is put on by the Kansas City Metro chapter of the American Public Works Association. And this year, and every year in the past, but in particular this year, Jody Demmeline and his staff helped a lot in putting together and organizing the event. John Paul, our GIS, helped Jody out, and they laid out some courses and such for the competition part. And not only is it competition and that sort of thing with snowplows and diggers and those good things, it's also training. So in the afternoon, there's training on both safety items and then also just snow operations in general. So it's a really good opportunity not only to go out and practice your skills and show some of your skills, but also to get some continuing education. And so I'll introduce Jody Demmeline. And one of the things that I'd say too in the event, we didn't have anybody out of our 7 participants in the individual events that didn't place at least 9th or better. And so we had a very good year competition-wise.
And how many teams were in this event?
Not sure. Jody, you want
I believe it was 16.
That's
16
great.
different teams. Yeah, it was, I think it was 16 teams made up of 13 cities.
Wow.
So Eric Willard came with me tonight. Eric was one of the first place finishers in the snowplow event this year.
So that's why I need to get this.
And we get to display the large trophy in the trophy case over there. We're very proud of that.
Great.
And so yeah, it was the team event, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
And so Eric and his partner Fabian placed first in that event. And what other events were you in?
Skid steer.
Skid
I
steer.
believe I was 5th or 7th in that. So nothing cool.
You
like
hit that one cone.
Yeah, I did. You were there.
That's right.
That was the difference. It really was.
It really was.
Well, I believe that this is, I got some background on the Eagle, because I was wondering, what does this have to do with snowplows? And I guess this is the APWA's logo or mascot.
For their logo.
And so this is amazing, and being a state champion in an event is a real benefit, real prestigious accomplishment. Thank you very much, Jody. You know, sometimes I have to rely on you to give me words because I lose the words. But this belongs to you. Thank you again for your placing. And yeah, come on in here.
Get in the middle.
Get in the middle because you're the one that went first.
Sure.
And thank you to all the Public Works staff, not just for the competitions, but also your diligence in taking care of things in the city on a daily basis to keep our infrastructure up to date. So thank you again.
You're welcome.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is a public hearing. I'm going to hold a public hearing on proposed redevelopment district for Main Street Marketplace at the northwest corner of Main Street and Moonlight Road. I will entertain a motion to open the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
I'm sorry? No. Motion, Melton, second, Moore, that we open a public hearing for the purpose of receiving comments on establishing a redevelopment district and to use the Kansas Tax Increment Financing Act to pay for extraordinary costs identified within the district. We will have a talk or discussion from the applicant who is here this evening, Joel Riggs and his team from Supermarket Developers. So that will be part of this. And I wanted to get a quick polling on this. They may go a little longer than 5 minutes. I don't think there's a problem with that, is there? Gentlemen? Okay, all right, that's fine then. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? The public hearing is now open. Please state your name and address for the record and come forward.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Council members. Joel Riggs, 5000 Kansas Avenue, Supermarket Developers, Inc. I'm going to go as quick as I can, but if I go too fast and you need me to back up, let me know. I'll stop and slow down, and I'll do as much as I can.
No problem.
First and foremost, I thought it was important to give a little background on Supermarket Developers as a whole, just because this is a little bit different of a project. You guys aren't going to normally going to see 3 different entities involved in a real estate development project, with us obviously in the forefront as the developer for the grocery store. But we still do have the existing grocery store, which is not owned by SMD. It will not be purchased by SMD. It's owned by the Cosentino Group. They're going to maintain ownership throughout this, and I'll indicate a little bit of what they're planning to do as that moves forward. We also have Moonlight Plaza LLC, which is the existing property owner that we're actually buying the property from, and he still owns a lot of the real estate that's going to be in between the existing Price Chopper and the grocery store. So, and that's Jeff Jacobs. He's represented tonight by Pete Heaven and his counsel, which is also here tonight, along with AWG's in-house counsel, Steve James, and the Development Initiatives Group with Chris Sally. He's going to speak after me. So I just there's multiple players. I mean, we're in the forefront, but there are multiple people. And it is kind of like herding cats sometimes when you're doing a project this big, because everybody has interests, everybody has ideas, and ultimately you kind of wrestle to the common denominator of what everybody wants, and that's a good project at the end of the day. So with that, I'll kind of open up. That's the development team as a whole. Which one's forward? There we go. Just us as a whole from a development standpoint, SMD, we are a wholly owned subsidiary of AWG. Meaning I only do projects for AWG retailers. We're a cooperative. So you are meeting one of the only not-for-profit developers in the United States. I say that often because it is a true fact. As a cooperative, we don't make a profit, and if we do make a profit, it goes back to the member retailers that own AWG. And there are roughly 800 member retailers that have about 35,000 stores across the U.S. So AWG comprises of a lot of different players. But locally, some of the projects that I have done that are shown on the screen, both local and national, like I said, we're in 36 states, so I do this all over the country. And I get to give presentations like this to multiple city councils. And almost every one of those projects that you see had some type of public-private partnership that between the city, county, school district, state, and SMD. Projects like this have been built throughout the country using the same financing mechanisms we're talking about tonight. In general, it's about a 19-acre project in total, but the grocery store obviously focuses on about 7 acres of that. But I do want you guys to realize, and I say this with 100% confidence, even though there's multiple property owners, the goal is the same for the whole property, and that is to redevelop the existing grocery store into new retail, carving that existing grocery store up into spaces for new retail. I want to make sure that people understand that. Redevelopment of the existing not just the pad sites, but the existing small shops that are adjacent to the grocery store. And then also in addition to that, we're just happening to build a 62,000 square foot grocery store on top. So all of that being said, this is a bigger project than just the grocery store. And it is a project that's looking at adding new retail to the city of Gardner. Over 63,000 square feet is planned for brand new retail. And that's going to be one of the largest retail projects Gardner's ever seen. Walmart, obviously the biggest as a single store entity, but doing multiple store, multiple use, pad sites and retail. This is the biggest project Gardner's ever seen. And I've been around for 18 years in this community, working on projects in this community, developing projects in this community. And this is the most exciting project I've been involved with in Gardner. Laying out kind of the TIF district boundaries, which is what you're talking about this evening. Project 1 is really the grocery store. You see lot 2 down to the lower left-hand side of your screen. That is a future pad site. What was part of the old CMI building and you'll notice, and will be talked about here in a little bit, part of the blight is, and part of the reason this project has not developed anything in the past has been the challenges of this location in and of itself. Some of you may be around long enough to remember when Lowe's came through and tried to do a pad site and a Lowe's on this building. Walmart looked at this location in the early 2000s prior to looking at the corner that they ultimately landed on. And really what it came down to, there were significant development challenges, costs challenges, stormwater challenges, infrastructure challenges, all of the things that we will talk about in depth as we move forward through this project. But it's not an easy piece of property to develop. You add Quick Trip to the site. After all of that, it's going to make it a little bit more challenging. But we are looking at multiple public projects, private projects as part of this whole thing. Project 2, the existing Price Chopper, as I mentioned, that property is looking to redevelop and create a new pad site. So the green space that's in front of the Price Chopper today ultimately will have new retail on it. And the existing building ultimately will have at least 2, likely 3, possibly 4, but I think more likely 3 tenants to carve up that 60,000 square foot building into 3 different 20,000 square foot boxes. The TIF district currently, you can, as we've talked, and you guys know this because you've been, this isn't new to any of you. The existing Costantino's, the existing small shops owned by Jeff Jacobs, Walgreens and Quick Trip are not part of this. I'll make sure that's clear. They are not part of this. However, they are part of the negotiations to build some of the improvements along 56 Highway. The implementation of a new traffic signal will require both Walgreens and Quick Trip's cooperation. We've been in contact with both of them. Obviously, we have a partner with Quick Trip in our Fuel Center program that's throughout the metro area, which is easier to negotiate with somebody than Walgreens, which clearly is in Chicago and not in Kansas City. Talked a little bit about this, and I'm trying to go fast just because I know the most important stuff is what you guys want to hear next. New 60,000 square foot plus of new retail pad sites, public improvements, utilities, traffic lanes, turn signal, which is probably one of the most critical things to this entire component. Your staff and myself were up in Topeka last week meeting with Kansas Department of Transportation and talking specifically about our traffic study, about the traffic signal, about the turn lanes, and working through all of that. It's going to be fun negotiating with KDOT, but they are in support of the project. It's just going to take some engineering to continue to move that process forward, but it is a requirement for us. It's a requirement from your Planning Commission for the improvements. So I want you to know that this project does not move forward without that. So that project has my utmost attention. Project 2, the redevelopment of the existing building. Like I said, 3 tenants most likely. There's been a significant amount of interest just from, in general, from people that aren't in Gardner, that want to be in Gardner. And much of, like all of you, I want to bring something to this community that you don't have today. And I don't like driving to Olathe when I have to do something. I would rather stay in Gardner. And as a resident, not of the city, but I am in the school district, I live in the Gardner's mailing zip code. It is something that you think about every day, and how much leakage you guys have as a community. Roughly 80–85% last time I looked of your tax base being residential and very limited commercial. This is something this community has needed for a long time. And I know you all know this. Big number at the very bottom is the total project cost. That's estimated about $27 million. That is the whole project, not just the grocery store, obviously. And the financing aspect of all this gets negotiated and discussed as we move through all this. Tonight is really setting up the TIF district boundaries and really nothing more than that. But as we work through the budgets and everything else, you will see the complete breakdowns of not only the project budget, but you'll see how it's financed and how we're recommending to finance all of that. So it is a very complex project. Your staff, myself, and our staff have been working through. I just thought this was a good little picture to add for those that travel 69 Highway up and down and have traveled that corridor. This is actually in Fort Scott, Kansas. This is a project I completed last year with SMD, where we acquired an empty grocery store. It was vacant when we bought it. And it had been in the same location for about the last 40 years, and the building looked like it. It was absolutely a wretched piece of real estate from the standpoint of its building infrastructure, but location-wise was in a great spot. And we found a retailer that wanted to go in, that is a retailer with AWG. We bought the building, came up with a plan to redevelop it, worked with the community, the city, put together TIF SID project, and reinvested. This was about a $5.5 million project all in. And we're able to put in a 36,000 square foot Price Chopper. It had a new Dunkin' Donuts that we brought to the market. as a drive-through that wasn't in there existing. Obviously, Price Chopper was new to the market. And this, from the standpoint, that's the same building. It's exactly the same building that was there before. We just made it look a heck of a lot better. And ultimately, that's what we'd like to do here. Not as a grocery store on the redevelopment, but we'd like to do something similar where the existing grocery store, the small shops, and the new grocery store all blend together from an architectural standpoint, traffic standpoint, planning standpoint, and ultimately a use standpoint. So I'm going to be done. I know I'm going quick. There's the preliminary site plan that we submitted to the planning staff. The site plan, preliminary plat, final plat were approved back last month in September. Actually, on the agenda tonight is the acceptance of the rights of way and easements for the final plat for your consideration. From a planning standpoint, at that level, we have the site plan approved, but we have a significant amount of work still. Construction documents, all of that still has to go through your staff. So I don't want you to think we're done by any stretch of the imagination. We've got a lot of time and money to spend to get to that point. But hopefully we'll get to that point in December. And at the end of that, start construction sometime in the first or second quarter of 2019. I'm going to turn it over to Chris Sally and let him talk a little bit about the next discussion point. I thought I was going forward. Are you're loading it? Thank you.
And please name and address for the record.
Yes, Chris Sally, Development Initiatives, 4505 Madison Avenue, Kansas City, Missouri.
Thank you.
Our firm was hired to do a qualification analysis for the Main Street marketplace and provide a professional opinion if the proposed district meets or exceeds a finding of blight under Kansas statutes. The Kansas statutes basically has 4 tests. Test number 1, to determine if there's a predominance of factors. We have found 6 out of the 9 factors to be present within the redevelopment area. Tests 2, 3, and 4 were not met, but all that you had to do was pass one of the tests. And basically, test 1 is a 2-part test, and the first part of the test is to determine if any of the following 9 conditions, and I'm going to go through every single one of these conditions in subsequent slides, were found within the redevelopment area. And then the second part of the test is causation, to determine if any of the following or any of the previous 9 conditions either substantially impaired or arrest the development or growth of municipality, 2 constitutes an economic or social liability, and 3 is a menace to public health, safety, morals, or welfare in its present condition and use. And again, all of these conditions do not have to be met. Only one of these has to be met. To begin, factor a substantial number of deteriorated or deteriorated structures. As Joel mentioned, on lot number 2, the lumber yard that was previously there has been vacant for over 15 years. This is a current picture of it. See the existing footings and foundations. Next picture, we did a tour of all the properties within the redevelopment area, and there was functional deficiencies within the existing building. Some of the HVAC equipment was over 26 years old, or the original lifespan of the building. Factor B is predominance of defective or inadequate street layout. The traffic study was done by priority engineers. They looked at all of the traffic and found that the overall service level was a level D, which is substandard. What you see in red arrows are sort of dead ends of Washington and Shawnee, and then the orange arrows are the private drive, which is substandard. The median, as you pull into Quick Trip, it's supposed to be painted yellow, but it's almost completely black just from cars running over that median. This next slide shows, again, crumbling sidewalks or no sidewalks at all. Again, the terminus of East Washington. Next factor is factor C, unsanitary or unsafe conditions. This arrow shows an open stormwater channel in the blue line. There's also a number of pictures of trash and debris, some illegal dumping that is on the vacant lot. And the unsafe conditions, there's a number of potholes throughout the parking lot. One of the factors that they will be addressing is the parking lot and the topography is very, very flat, so the water tends to sit on that lot and cause problems for the parking lot. Factor D, again, deterioration of site improvements. This is lot number 2. Factor E was not found, nor was factor F, and nor was factor G. So again, 6 out of the 9 were found. These were the 3 that were not found. Factor H, existence of conditions which endanger life, property by fire or other causes. Again, the open channel, you have an attractive nuisance, standing water. Factor, again, the conditions which endanger life, property by fire or other causes. On this lot number 2, you actually have wood that was part of the existing foundations with nails protruding and sticking up. Factor I, conditions which create economic obsolescence. This is one of the conditions that it's sort of retail changes and even grocery stores change, and today one of the first mail order retail stores in the entire country just went bankrupt, and basically went bankrupt from a mail order online store. So if you do not change and you don't keep up with the marketplace, there is definitely economic obsolescence that can happen. Just doing a quick examination of the additional retail that will be generated on the site. We'll have almost $20 million of annual sales within the redevelopment area. And in fact, the Gardner strategic plan, I think Joel mentioned this as well, the Gardner has a trade pull factor of 0.67. So that means that, again, residents are traveling outside of Gardner to shop and spend their money, and they are providing that revenue to the city of Olathe or other cities for those cities to create infrastructure and fund their tax base. The plan also shows right here that in Gardner, the grocery store is undersupplied by just under $50 million annually of sales, which equates to just over 120,000 square feet of retail square footage. So again, in summary, we found 6 of the 9 conditions present that meets all 3 of the causation factors. And in our professional opinion, we believe that the redevelopment area meets or exceeds the finding of blight by Kansas statutes. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, this is a public hearing, so we will not be answering questions at this time. Okay. But there will be probably some questions during our consideration of the TIF districts.
Great.
Thank you. Any other comments for the public hearing? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved. Second.
Motion Melton, second Moore, that we close the public hearing. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Public hearing is now closed. It's now time for public comments. Members of the public are welcome to use this time to make comments about city matters or items on the agenda that are not part of a public hearing, since we just had a public hearing. That particular section will not be heard here during public comments. However, if you wish to make comment on any other item on or off of the agenda, I ask that you come forward, state your name and address for the record, make sure that you abide by the 5-minute time limit, and engage in no personal attacks or profanity. With that, the floor is now open for public comments. All right. All right, let's move on to the consent agenda. Is there any member of the council wishes to remove an item from the consent agenda? All right, I'll entertain a motion on the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Motion Moore, second Winters, that we approve the consent agenda. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? Consent agenda passes. Committee recommendation number 1, consider adopting an ordinance approving amendments TA-18-05, TA-18-09, and TA-18-10 to the Gardner Municipal Code, Title 17 Land Development Code. Larry Powell, good evening.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Tonight we have 3 text amendments to bring before you. One of them has to do with the creation of a new interchange facility. The other 2 are basically, the second one is a housekeeping detail with fencing, and the third one is a request to change part of our code to allow for the improvement of the lots out at Gardner Lake to make them more buildable. So the first one being the topic that was initiated by City Council on February 5th, 2018, and this was to address the unique context of development near the I-35 interchange area, specifically the 175th Street exit and the Gardner Road exit, to address the particular density and mix of land uses as follows. And Councilman Gogorczyk made a motion to direct the Planning Commission to consider the creation of a new interchange zone for the properties located around the I-35 interchanges. Was seconded by Commissioner Milton, and then it was voted in favor of. This originally went to the Planning Commission back on April 24th, 2018, and we presented the context of the concept to them, and there were some issues at that point in time with the Planning Commission. They felt like that to ensure a better mix of regional or community services for that to occur, that it wasn't best to basically limit the development's opportunities, the developer's opportunities. And as such, the original project then went back to staff, and we subsequently directed different provisions, and those were brought to the Planning Commission recently and now are coming to you for a recommendation. So the new district concept is to ensure that regulations encouraging development and annexations into Gardner and to boost tax revenues of the proposed area, which we are calling an activity center, is to create an activity center plan district as designed to be an optional approach that a developer can choose in order to qualify for development incentives. So this only works if we put a set of incentives in place in tandem with this new activity center, and we have not developed those incentives yet, but they would be based upon the existing toolbox that we currently have in place, and possibly 2 more items that we'll be bringing to you in the next couple of months, that being a land bank and a neighborhood revitalization program. So the positive and public partnership that we're trying to create for these community goals would address the concern about empty lots and the regulations for providing a mechanism to allow but not delay or reprieve in developing a particular use, and that there's sufficient demand for that use. In other words, we would try and set aside the property so that it could not all be used for a particular item. In other words, all warehousing, all retail, all residential. We would want to develop a mix around that particular area. It was basically felt too that the best way to do this was to set some parameters on distance around that intersection. So this has a limit of an activity center that would be created of approximately a half mile, roughly in a circular pattern around the interchange itself. And this activity center then is only supposed to be used around interchanges. We couldn't use it downtown. We couldn't use it at the fairgrounds or some other specific piece of property. So the locations of these are to be used along major streets, arterials, and collectors. And again, those areas are to be developed within that half mile so that we facilitate and keep in place these following parameters within the activity center. Excuse me just a minute. And they would be to Support beneficial but unanticipated development type, but not be overly prescriptive. The regulations for the plan district to allow for departures from standards to do general plan districts, except that the activity center plan district safeguards would safeguard current standards that support the following key city goals: good access management practices, connectivity with surrounding development, enhanced landscape and building design as viewed from arterial and collector streets, and the compatibility of design adjacent to less intense uses. The sub-area plan goals, which are currently in place by this council, would be to encourage pedestrian, non-motorized, and public transit infrastructures and other public amenities, and also intend to be encouraged through development incentives. So based on that, then the recommendation would be to have those particular items as offered in the ordinance approved tonight. By the way, we've written one ordinance for all three of these, so I don't know if you wish to have questions on each one as I proceed, or if you wish to wait till the end.
I think we'll go on ahead and hear all three, and then if we've got questions, we can address those after public comments.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
TA 18-09, which is fencing. This basically is a housekeeping item. When we did the last round of improvements to the fencing areas, we found that inadvertently there was a small section that was not completely, didn't get copied over into the code correctly. So these are all corrections to that particular aspect. Everything that you see in red are the definitional items that had to be put back in that were there originally, but for some reason did not get continued into the code. So this is basically a housekeeping detail. And basically what we're talking about is a definition for front fencing, which is all the fencing that's basically in front of a house or the front or the residence. Side street fencing, which would be adjacent to a side street or lot line, but not including the front lot line or in front of the house. And that would meet the same standards as the rear yard fencing, interior rear yard side fencing, which would be giving it the height definitions that we currently have, which is 6 feet a maximum. And then the other one is to add the vinyl to the materials list. It had inadvertently been left off, so vinyl fencing would be an allowed material. We currently allow it and have accepted it in the past, but unfortunately it didn't get into the list, so that's the X for that. So the fence materials are not considered to be decorative or ornamental. These are the exceptions to not be used, and that's including chain link with or without slats, welded wire or similar materials, including any materials that are vinyl coated, is permitted. And that is, the exception to that could be that if you're in a agricultural area and you have more than 3 acres of property and you're using this type of fencing to maintain farm or livestock animals. So in those cases, some of those would be allowed, but in residential areas they would not. And that's basically, those are the items for the fencing improvements. And then the staff recommendation would be to improve those revisions to the recommended text of TA-18-09 and to retain the current standards that were inadvertently left out from the previous recommended amendment to section 17.08.040B. The final item is to change a definition of non-conforming lots at Gardner Lake. We currently have a homeowner who asked to be annexed into the city. We annexed him. We annexed additional property so that he could improve his residence out at Gardner Lake, and then found out he didn't have enough room on the new annexed property because of the setback requirements to meet the current building standards. And then we got to reviewing, and it appears to us that at least 80 to 90% of all the lots around Gardner Lake could never meet our current building standards and couldn't meet the old existing Gardner building standards. And so we've decided that in order to fix this, at least temporarily, because this person would like to build next year, we would like to change the definition of non-conforming lots so that this would allow then the existing non-conforming lots to be built on. And that is the purpose of this section. And so the part that you have in front of you in red reads, a non-conforming lot shall not be used, conveyed, transferred, subdivided, nor have its boundaries altered in any manner except for governmental purposes that would compound or further increase the non-conforming characteristics of the lot. Such non-conforming lots may be combined per the applicable plat procedures, which we've already done for this client, by the way, provided this merger does not increase the degree of any nonconformity, and any such newly combined lot that does not meet current lot standards will continue to be a legal non-conforming lot, even though it was not platted legally prior to the adoption of the code. Boiled down, it basically means that if we can fit a house in there, we're going to fit a house in there. And this has been reviewed by our city attorney and has been approved to this particular verbiage.
And this is only for Gardner Lake, is that right?
This is limited to Gardner Lake, yes, sir.
How can we do that?
I'm sorry, this is actually a non-conforming standard to be used citywide.
Okay, right, that's what I
Yeah,
wanted to
I'm
make sure,
sorry.
'cause I didn't know
What
how
we would
can-
like to do is, the planning commission, we've had a brief discussion with them, is that we think we're probably going to need to create an overlay district for Gardner Lake that will take into account all the existing property sizes and create some type of building standard for that area in and of itself. But that's going to be a lot more work, and it'll have to be looked at down the road. This allows this gentleman to build.
Right. And I guess, is there a way we can, because I'm sure there's other lots in town that probably are non-conforming or older ones that we could.
There
use
are a
as-
few in the oldest section of
Right.
our community, and this should pretty much take care of
Okay,
any
that's
issues
what
that we
I
have
kinda
for
wanna
that.
make sure we,
Yes, sir.
thank you.
Yes.
So then we have, those are the three that we have for the ordinance, number 2587, and the planning commission would recommend that that be adopted.
Okay. Thank you, Larry. I'm going to ask you to stand aside for a couple of seconds, ask for public comment on committee recommendation item number 1. Seeing no one coming forward, questions? Rich has already started the questioning. Anything else, Rich?
Yeah, the chain link part, I just want to clarify, is chain link okay with just vinyl coated now? Is that?
I think it's on the non-okay list. Hang on a minute, I gotta get back to it.
That's for, we're going to say that chain link fence is not allowed in Gardner, is that?
Fence materials that are not considered to be decorative or ornamental, including chain link with or without slats, welded wire, and similar materials, including any of these materials that are vinyl coated. Oh, I'm sorry, are permitted. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right,
we've
that's
added
what I
are
was thinking.
permitted.
Thank you.
It was the other way, we now permit it.
Huh?
We have that in our community.
Well, I know, that's what I want to make sure we're not making it illegal. So.
Yeah, correct. Well,
Somebody was going to be upset.
when we have a code change, existing materials are allowed to
I
stay until
understand.
such
I
time
just-
as they.
But I'll get the neighbor
allowed.
goes, well, he's got it. And I don't want to have that conversation.
Anything else?
Sorry
That's it.
for the
No, it's okay.
confusion.
Randy?
Yeah, I've got a couple of items. First, I want to say thank you for all the hard work between your team, Larry, and the Planning Commission. I went back and read the notes that you guys provided from April 24th, and it looks like Commissioner Freeman and Austin had some angst, if you will, about the TA 1805.
Interchange.
Yeah, the interchange, thank you. And I appreciate you working through that, and I read your notes with respects to your rebuttal. Will we have any sort of grandfather clause at the I-35 and 175th interchange on up-and-coming parcels within that 1 mile circumference?
When you say I-35 and where?
175th?
175th? Well, if you're referring to the lots that are inside the city limits, they're already platted and zoned in an appropriate manner. So someone would have to assemble a rather large property to make this an effective use item. It could happen. Someone could buy Conestoga, Walmart, whatever, and use it and use that. Yes, sir.
And let me make a quick clarification.
Let me clarify myself, and thank you, Mayor. And I should have said this, and I apologize, Larry. What I'm thinking about is the property between, to the north of Walmart and 175th. There's a strip of land there that's undeveloped as we speak. I don't know if there's something coming, but would that be grandfathered in?
On the side of the McDonald's side?
No, sir, on the south side of it.
It's that little strip of land in between Santa Fe and
corner from Subway.
That property, I believe, is owned by the Airport Authority. And
Oh, okay. I was under the impression it was.
it is currently under review for a use.
Oh, okay.
But it would not be affected by this, no, sir.
Enough said.
And the
Thank you.
clarification I wanted to make is that this is an optional zoning.
Correct.
So
Correct.
it's not like it would be required, they would be required to use this particular zoning. It's one that if they want to do a variety of different uses on their property, this is an option that they could exercise.
Yeah, this design is
So-
an optional, not mandatory zoning district.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
No, and I agree and support that. I just wanted to clarify that one question.
Yep, absolutely.
But thanks for the heavy lifting.
Yeah. Councilmember Baldwin? Councilmember Anders? Wait, okay. Great. Well, having heard no other comments, I will move to a motion on the committee recommendation.
So
item
moved.
1.
Second.
Motion Gregorczyk, second Melton, that we adopt ordinance number, this is 2587, if I'm correct. An ordinance amending the Land Development Code of the City of Gardner, Kansas by amending the sections of Title 17 of the Gardner Municipal Code. City Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilman Winters?
Yes.
Councilman Baldwin?
Yes.
Councilman Gregorczyk?
Yes.
Councilman Melton?
Yes.
Councilman Moore?
Yes.
Ordinance 2587 passes. Thank you, Larry. Oh, there's one more here. Committee recommendation item number 2, consider accepting the dedication of right-of-way and easements on the final plat FP-18-06 Main Street Marketplace.
Yes, sir. This is the area that was recently referred to and shown on the TIF and CID presentation. So the area that's currently in here for a final plat, the Planning Commission has gone through and reviewed that and is recommending that on final plat -18-06, a final plat for Main Street Marketplace with the parcels that are listed there be located on the northwest corner of South Moonlight Road and East Main Street, and a staff report dated September 25th, 2018, and a final plat dated September 12th, 2018, with the conditions outlined below and recommended to the governing body to accept any rights-of-way and easements. And we've been kind of through the background quite recently. I don't know that we need to do that, but it is an area that has seen some growth over the years and is currently in need of additional assistance and growth area. And so the final plat includes the dedication of new access easements, utility easements, and rights-of-way dedication along US 56 East Highway or East Main Street for road improvements proposed by the applicant to better serve the development. And the proposed public improvement plans include the pavement widening for right-hand turn lanes from East Main Street into the development, which as a state highway requires approval from the Kansas Department of Transportation, and plans have been submitted to KDOT for review. And at the time of this council action form, KDOT has completed the review and provided comments to the applicant's engineer, and final improvement for road improvements are pending. Therefore, a condition of approval is included on the final plat approved by the Planning Commission stating that KDOT must approve proposed road improvements to US 56 Highway before the plat can be signed and released for recording. During the September 25th, 2018 Planning Commission meeting, the Commission considered the final plat application and no members of the public spoke, and the Commission approved the final plat with 3 conditions with a unanimous vote and recommends the governing body accept the dedication of the rights-of-way and easement. And the financial impact of this would be the payment of the excise tax in the amount of $44,631.62 because part of the property is not platted, and this final plat takes care of that. And that shall be paid to the city prior to the mayor signing an approvable recordable plat. So we accept the suggested motion is to accept the dedication of the right-of-way and easements of the final plat for the Main Street Marketplace.
Thank you, Larry. Any public comments on new business item number, or committee recommendation item number 2? Hearing none. Questions for Mr. Powell? With hearing none, I will entertain a motion on committee recommendation item number 2.
So moved.
Second?
Motion Melton, second Gregorczyk, that we that we accept the dedication of right-of-way and easements on the final plat for Main Street Marketplace. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? Committee recommendation item number 2 passes. Thank you, Larry. Moving on to new business. New business item number 1, consider adopting an ordinance making findings, establishing a redevelopment district within the city of Gardner, Kansas. Interim Finance Director Matt Wolf, good evening.
Good evening, Mayor. Tonight, the City Council is being asked to consider an ordinance making findings and establishing a redevelopment district within the City of Gardner, Kansas. The ordinance establishes the boundaries of the district, makes certain findings that the district is eligible area, and that development or redevelopment of the area is necessary. This is a required step toward the city's possible provision of property tax increment or sales tax increment assistance for the redevelopment district. The city would have to approve one or more project plans before any TIF assistance could be provided. The project plans will be presented to the City Council for consideration in December. The city's financial advisor is currently conducting a but-for analysis for the proposed redevelopment project and developing revenue projections. City staff will share this information with the fire district and school district once they are completed. It is staff's recommendation that the governing body adopts an ordinance making findings and establishing a redevelopment district within the City of Gardner, Kansas.
Thank you, Matt. Since we already had a public hearing on this, I'm going to dispense with public comment unless the applicant wishes to come forward and elaborate a little bit on the TIF district boundaries.
Mr. Mayor, Joel Riggs, happy to answer any questions you may have. Other than that, I have nothing to add to the presentation already provided.
All right, thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Hearing none, I will ask for questions from the dais on this.
I don't have a question, but I'm a tenant of part of this development district, so because of that, I'll probably be abstaining for most of the votes on this matter. So,
okay.
Just wanted to clear that up.
All right, thank you. Okay. All right. Hearing no other comments or questions, we will move on to a motion on ordinance number 2588. You have a motion.
Second. Oh, wait, I'll give
So
you.
moved.
All right.
I'm
Thank-
sorry.
Thank you. Well, since he mentioned first, it'll be motion
Please.
Melton, second Gregorczyk, that we adopt ordinance number 2588, making findings and establishing a redevelopment district within the City of Gardner, Kansas pursuant to KSA 12-1770 at SEC, as amended, also known as the Main Street Marketplace Redevelopment District. City Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilman Baldwin.
Yes.
Councilman Gregorczyk.
Yes.
Councilman Melton.
Yes.
Councilman Moore.
Yes.
Councilman Winters.
Abstain?
That's correct. All right, ordinance number 2588 passes 401. New business item number 2, consider adopting an ordinance relating to the permitting of application for and payment of fees associated with the licensure of a massage establishment. Larry Powell, good evening. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming in tonight and giving us your thoughts. Okay.
Thank you, Mayor. This is actually a continuation of an item that I made a request from at the last City Council meeting, and that was to consider changing and adopting an ordinance change to permitting the application for and payment of fees associated with the licensure of a massage establishment. As you may recall, we currently have a massage establishment business in town that lost their lease, and as such, they, of course, lost their location to do business in. The City of Gardner currently licenses business establishments by location, and so therefore, even though they still are legally licensed to do massage therapy in the City of Gardner, they have no place to do it in. So this is the change that we have before you is to, they have another location, but we only accept fees on an annual basis in December. And even though that is close upon us, they would have to pay a full fee in order to reopen their business for 2 months, basically, and then pay it again another $200 in December to continue that business next year. So in effect, what we're doing is asking for a change in the ordinance to allow for the transfer of an existing fully paid license from one location to another legally approved location, and this ordinance has been written by our city attorney to provide that guidance for you.
Great. Thank you, Larry. Appreciate it. Any public comment on new business item number 2? Hearing none, any questions or comments for Yes.
Larry, do we have other types of businesses that would lend itself to this same change?
No, sir, this is the only one that we actually issue a license that's site-specific for.
Okay. Great. Anyone else? And I believe also our police chief looked at this as well during this process, and I can say pretty much with certainty that you're absolutely fine with the change. Yeah. Okay, great. Hearing no other comments, I will entertain a motion on ordinance 2589.
So moved. Second.
Motion. Motion Baldwin?
No, it was
Todd. Dang it.
Todd is jumping out there.
Motion Winters, second Melton. That we adopt ordinance. My depth perception in my right ear is gone. That we adopt ordinance 2589 of the City of Gardner, Kansas, amending section 5.15.030 of the Gardner Municipal Code relating to the permitting of application for and payment of fees associated with the licensure of a massage establishment. City Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilman Gregorczyk?
Yes.
Councilman Melton?
Yes.
Councilman Moore?
Yes.
Councilman Winter?
Yes.
Councilman Baldwin?
Yes.
Ordinance 2589 passes. New business item number 3, consider adopting a resolution amending Resolution 1956 relating to the establishment of fees for the licensure of massage establishment. I believe this is just housekeeping, is it not, Mr. Powell?
Yes, sir. This is a related resolution for the ordinance you've just passed that allows us to change the timing of the collection of the fees from not only during the year of an annual fee, but it creates a semi-annual fee for the rest of the year at the same at a half the regular fee.
Okay, great. Public comments on new business item number 3. I don't expect any, but all right. Questions? And we'll entertain a motion on resolution 1998.
So second.
Great. Motion Baldwin, second Moore, that we adopt resolution 1998, a resolution amending resolution 1956, relating to the establishment of fees for licensure of massage establishment pursuant to Title V of the Gardner Municipal Code. City Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilman Melton?
Yes.
Councilman Moore?
Yes.
Councilman Winter?
Yes.
Councilman Baldwin?
Yes.
Councilman Gregorczyk?
Yes.
Resolution 1998 passes. Let's see here. New business on number 4, consider an oil well permit and license application for 8 oil wells located in the southwest quarter of section 14-14-22, Township and Range. Mr. Kramer, good evening.
Good evening. Again, this is very similar to the applications that you saw in March. They're on the same CUP. So one of the conditions, major conditions that we have on oil wells and permits for that is that they fall under a conditional use plan. Planning staff has reviewed this application, and it is in conformance with the plan. We still have the conditions that go along with that CUP, which also include landscaping for the tanks once they're constructed. And so we're recommending approval with the conditions herein that are similar to the last. And I believe the applicant and representatives are here this evening if you have any specific questions.
That Thomas Investments and the drillers are here over in the corner if you have any questions. Thank you. Any public comments on new business on number 4? Hearing none. Questions, comments? Okay. I'll entertain a motion on new business on number 4.
So moved. Go ahead. Second.
Motion Melton, second Gregorczyk, that we approve the oil well permanent license application for 8 oil wells located in the southwest quarter of section 14-14-22, Township and Range, subject to staff recommended conditions of approval. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? New business item number 4 passes. Thank you, gentlemen. All right, council updates. Let's start with staff. Does staff have anything for council? We'll start with, I'm going to start with you, Michael. You just sat down, so I'll start with Gons Garcia. Utilities?
None, sir.
Okay, great. Public Works, Jason Bruce, and the rain everywhere. How's our grounds keeping up?
Well, we've lost a lot of soccer games and football games, that's for sure. So at this rate, we're going to be playing until Christmas. But no updates. We're making them up. So we're getting them in using Sundays. So.
Yep. Thank you. Larry Powell.
No, sir, not now.
Okay. Michael, anything else?
Not this evening.
Okay. Chief Pruding.
No, sir.
City Clerk.
No, sir.
Well, I've got something that. All right. Regarding appointments, make sure that we try to get these appointments filled. We got 2 appointment fills that were done actually through council, the consent agenda items, and so I appreciate that, but let's stay on top of it. We've got some more positions expiring next month, so we really need to start working on that. And I will make a plea to people who might be watching this on YouTube. If you want to serve, there's plenty of places to serve. If you've got an interest, get your name in, get it to the city clerk or to myself, and we will find a place for you. Yes, I'm sorry? Or any one of the people on the dais. Doesn't have to be me or the city clerk. You can get it to Rich. Just send them all to Rich. So anyway, that would be very helpful. We need folks who will step up and help in those committees. So, Finance Director Wolf. Oh, congratulations, by the way, for your election to the Kansas GFOA presidency.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nice.
He took the
They really
gavel
stick
at
it to the new guy.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor. I have one update. Just want to let you know, make sure the council knew that last week the Kansas Government Finance Officers Association presented Interim City Administrator Laura Gorley with the Lifetime Achievement Award.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
For her dedication to public service and municipal finance.
And it's well and richly deserved, Laura. Really appreciate your service all the way around and your lifetime of dedication to the city.
She should probably give a speech now.
I think we should. Yeah, she already did that. Yeah. City Attorney.
Nothing.
Nothing. Wow. I'm shocked. All right, Interim City Administrator, aka Lifetime Achievement recipient, Laura Gorley. You have anything for us?
Just very, very briefly, I keep finding things. Councilman Baldwin asked about the school collaborative work, and I have made contact with Superintendent Stranathan, and we're going to meet and pick the ball back up in November, and then we'll let you know where it goes from there. And also the Big Bull Creek Task Force, you were all supposed to be getting together with Edgerton, and I found some notes on that, so I'm going to contact City Administrator Bethlin about getting you all back on track for that. That's
Great.
it.
All right. Thank you, Laura. Let's start on my far left with Councilman Gorsick. You're first with any kind of governing body updates.
I don't have any updates, Mayor, and I appreciate the opportunity. I would like to poll council on their interest in rescinding Ordinance 1963. I know you and I have talked about it briefly, but I just wanted to put that out there as to the interest of rescinding that ordinance. That's all I have, sir.
Okay. Councilman Gorsick's asked about 1963. I think that it's probably high time that we...
I think at this time it's no longer needed. It can come back if we needed to.
Okay. Anybody else? 1963 was the ordinance that created an appeals procedure for folks who were direct reports.
I thought it was 1968.
No, it's 1963.
63?
Yeah, it's 1963. Yes.
Sir, are you speaking of Resolution 1963?
I'm sorry, Resolution 1963, yes. Resolution 1963.
I just wanted to clarify.
Yep, that's
Yes,
correct.
Thank you.
Yeah. There's arguments that that could be infringing on certain duties and processes, especially around personnel, that might be detrimental to our city and open us up to some liability possibly.
Is this something we want to have a conversation with the city attorney? And
It's a resolution. It's not something that would be. Yeah,
I mean from the legal perspective of liability.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be good for the city attorney to weigh in on that.
Well, we talked about this at the time it was adopted. Anytime that the governing body steps into personnel decisions, you obviously create that much more exposure. One loophole that kind of precludes a lot of employment litigation, specifically Section 1983 civil rights litigation. An impediment to a lot of that is oftentimes you have to show that the governing body took final and formal action. And by removing this, then, to the extent that it was appealed up, the appeal of the performance review, then, that would add a defense to one of those claims. And, just generally, I think, you've heard NPR come up here, and Courtney Kroger from NPR come and say that the governing body should focus on policy decisions and leave personnel decisions to the administrative level. And so I think in that vein, I'm sure NPR would be happy to see this resolution repealed.
I think it's a great tool to have in our back pocket if we need it again later. A new version of it if it needs to come to that.
I'm okay with it going.
So that'll be brought back.
Well, I think that we would probably have to do, would it be possible to get this looked at and then bring back a recommendation? Or is there even a need to do that? I mean, it's up to us.
If we decide to vote it away, it goes away.
Okay. Well, do you wish to just have that on the next agenda then to get that done?
Fine.
All right.
Going to be on the consent agenda?
No.
No, it's a resolution.
It's a resolution.
Sorry. It's a resolution.
We would have to repeal it by resolution. So yes, it would have to be a roll call vote. Okay, let's go ahead and tee that up on the agenda for the next council meeting.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Mayor.
That's fine. All right, Mr. Mark Baldwin.
The only thing I wanted to see if the governing body had read their email regarding that teacher's project on the civics lesson.
Yes.
I thought it was a great idea, and I wrote back and said anything that I could do or we could do would be great, so I just wanted to see if everybody else was on board as well.
Oh, yeah. I replied back in church even.
Yep.
I just wanted to let us know whatever comes up on his end with his planning and ideas.
I think it's a great idea, and it's good civics, and it's also good from the standpoint of governance to encourage those kind of activities in the community, and the fact that they're going to be coming up with ideas to improve our community. Give us some ideas.
I'm scared.
They might think of something you haven't thought of yet.
I know, right? That's well, luckily we're all the same mental age.
Yes. Okay. All right.
That's it for me.
Great. Thanks. Councilman Winters?
Nothing.
Nothing. Okay. Council President?
Got nothing.
You just came in from Europe, and you're flying out at like 4 in the morning tomorrow morning.
7 a.m.
7 a.m. Oh.
Yeah.
You'll be getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, so
Yep.
we'll try to get you out of here quick. Council Vice President?
I got nothing.
Wow.
I mean, well, I will chime in that it's been, those folks who are watching at home, it's been pretty lonely on the Gardner Greenway at 5 o'clock in the morning in the last week and a half for some reason, so I'm missing you guys. The normal crew that I run or walk by aren't out anymore, so between the rain and the cold, they've stopped coming out, so.
Yeah.
But
you
anyway.
want a medal?
No. They just get wet.
All right, guys. Hey, thanks a lot. And I do appreciate the work that the Parks and Rec Department have done in particular with regard to the Greenway and keeping it up. And you guys have done a great job out there. And I'm looking forward to a really neat fall and winter and spring season. Getting ready for spring cleanup. So I'm going to put in a big plug really early on that. So, okay. I want to really quickly thank the folks again at the Fire District for the work that they're doing. You guys are getting plaudits and kudos from all over northeastern Kansas on how you guys are doing things right now, and I just wanted to give you guys a shout out and appreciation from the city of Gardner, who's easily your biggest customer. For a job well done, and I know you guys just picked up some new equipment some smaller fire prevention vehicles, as well as a larger ladder. Is that correct?
Yeah, we, our squad, I'm sure you've seen it running around town, it's not
Yep.
in service full time, but it's a quick response vehicle and it just roams all day long, so it takes most of the medical calls, it gets there a lot quicker, saves a lot of wear and tear on the big
That's great.
trucks. Again, the first of the year, we'll go in service every single day from 8 to 5, so you'll see it a lot more on the streets, and our ladder truck is supposed to be in the end of April, 1st of May, so we're looking forward to that. Added 3 additional staff for next year, so that's going to help.
That's great.
That squad unit, and we've also added another chief, battalion chief Morley's going to come in 8 to 5. He's going to be working with emergency management, so he'll be
That's
working
great.
close with the city and the county and all of our entities to try to get all of our emergency operation plans up and going.
Great.
It's exciting what's going on. So
It is really exciting, and that big truck that you're bringing is a 107-foot ladder, isn't it?
it's a 100-foot, point.
Yeah, that's going to reach the top of virtually every large warehouse that we've got.
That's a good idea.
It's a big truck.
Yeah, they had the big green one out at Coleman a couple of weeks ago, unfortunately, I might add, but
Yeah.
that was pretty impressive.
I know.
We had to use it. We had to use our current ladder to bring personnel.
Oh, thank you again for your service.
We sure do appreciate the support we get from the city too.
Yeah. All right. That being said, I will entertain we have an executive session on the calendar. I'll entertain a motion on executive session.
So moved.
Second.
Motion Melton, second Baldwin, that we recess into executive session to discuss potential acquisition of real property pursuant to KSA 75-4319B6 for the preliminary discussion of the acquisition of real property beginning at 8:13 p.m. And I don't think we're going to need more than 10 minutes. Return to regular session at 8:23 p.m. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? We are recessed into executive session.
We're going back in. No,
Where do we need?
I'll entertain a motion to resume regular session.
Second.
Motion Melton, second Moore, that we resume regular session. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, any abstentions? We are back in regular session. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion Baldwin, second Melton, that we adjourn. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, any abstentions? We are adjourned at 8:23.